They've been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings.
When the artificial intelligence system first translated the long-lost Sumerian tablets, the world of archaeology and linguistics trembled with awe. The clay fragments, etched with wedge-shaped cuneiform symbols, had been sitting in museum vaults for over a century. Many of them were considered too fragmented, too obscure, or too damaged for any meaningful translation. Human experts had managed to decode portions over the years, but large gaps persisted. Sentences that began with divine proclamations and ended in cryptic warnings. Fragments of hymns interwoven with what seemed like astronomical records, and strange genealogies that made little sense. When AI finally pieced together those gaps, it did more than restore a forgotten language. It opened a door into a version of humanity's past that was profoundly unsettling. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The AI's ability to learn from incomplete linguistic data had already surpassed any human translator. Trained on millions of language samples, historical texts, and modern linguistic models, it approached Sumerian not as a static dead language, but as a living system that could evolve and shift meaning through cultural context. By cross-referencing Akkadian, Elamite, and Proto-Semitic roots, the AI reconstructed syntax and semantics previously thought untranslatable. But as the system progressed, researchers noticed something strange. The translations contained references to events, technologies, and anatomical descriptions that seemed anachronistic, impossibly advanced for a civilization that flourished around 4000 BCE. The machine didn't interpret, it translated literally, and that was the most terrifying part. The tablets described a creation narrative that diverged sharply from known myths. While familiar names appeared, Anu, Enki, Inanna, the roles they played were disturbingly different. Humanity, the text claimed, was not crafted in reverence or divine affection, but engineered through deliberate genetic intervention. The AI's translation revealed sequences that, in modern terms, resembled instructions for biological modification. The essence of clay was mixed with the blood of the overseers, one passage suggested, using terms that directly mapped onto genetic or cellular processes. It spoke of vessels of flesh prepared to host the spark from the star-bearers. Scholars debated whether this was poetic metaphor or evidence of lost technological understanding, yet the precision of the phrasing, and its consistency across several independent tablets, was too coherent to dismiss. The most disturbing aspect came from what the AI discovered within the recurring symbol groups once thought to be mere scribal marks. The algorithm identified patterns that corresponded to mathematical formulas, ratios, astronomical constants, and chemical sequences. One fragment detailed the movement of celestial bodies with a level of accuracy unmatched until the modern era. Another described cycles of cleansing, connected to catastrophic floods and skyfire. These weren't allegories, they were data, recorded with clinical precision. The AI's reconstruction of these patterns suggested the Sumerians may have inherited, or been taught, knowledge from a source far beyond their own developmental capacity. It was as if they were remembering, not inventing. As more translations emerged, a picture of the ancient world took form, a network of human settlements overseen by beings described not as gods, but as those who descended. These beings were not omnipotent. They were administrators, scientists, and enforcers. They organized early humanity into castes, establishing codes of labor, metallurgy, and worship that corresponded eerily with the earliest urban systems of Uruk and Eridu. The AI's translation implied that civilization itself may have been an orchestrated project, one with strict oversight and periodic resets. This wasn't the story of humanity's ascent from ignorance, it was the account of humanity's management. The system also uncovered a recurring motif that chilled even the most skeptical linguists: the recall of flesh. This phrase appeared in several unrelated tablets, usually in conjunction with symbols representing the sky, blood, and the number 7. The AI correlated the passages and determined that they described a process by which the overseers reclaimed their creations. It was not a metaphorical or spiritual event, but a physical retrieval, a cleansing of the population through plagues, famine, or environmental disaster. The text implied that these recalls had occurred multiple times in human prehistory. They will forget, and we will begin again. one translation stated flatly. It was a line that sounded more like a laboratory note than a mythic prophecy. Historians struggled to make sense of the implications. Could these writings reflect humanity's cyclical collapses? Societal resets brought about by natural cataclysms, later mythologized as divine punishment? Or did they preserve, in encoded form, an actual record of external manipulation? The AI itself could not discern intent. It presented the data without judgment, mapping the probability of each interpretation. But the statistical likelihood that the phrases referred to natural cycles rather than deliberate acts was strikingly low. In one of its summaries, the machine calculated that the references to purifications and revisions of form were 87% consistent with descriptions of active intervention. The translation went further, uncovering an entire lexicon previously unseen in Sumerian corpus studies. Words for devices, energies, and substances without any known equivalent in ancient Mesopotamian life. One term, zirgalu, appeared repeatedly in association with the phrase breath of eternity. When cross-checked against later Akkadian texts, the AI noted similarities with words denoting magnetic or electrical phenomena. Another phrase, milam kugal, once assumed to refer to divine radiance, was reinterpreted as field of containment, possibly a kind of energy barrier. The convergence of these linguistic clues suggested that ancient Sumerians may have described technologies or forces using the only vocabulary available to them: religious metaphor. As word of the findings spread, the research community split into factions. Some hailed the AI as a revolutionary tool that would finally unravel the origins of civilization. Others accused it of overfitting, forcing meaning into the noise of an incomplete record. Yet the more datasets the AI processed, the more internally consistent the translations became. When it compared Sumerian narratives with Egyptian pyramid texts and Indus Valley seals, it detected overlapping terminology, shared phonemes referring to the Watchers, the Return, and the Renewal of Seed. These connections, impossible to fabricate through coincidence, hinted at a common source tradition spanning continents and millennia. What unnerved the team most was the section of text that appeared to describe future cycles. The AI identified predictive syntax in the tablets, sequences indicating recurrence or expectation rather than past events. The Sumerians, it seemed, had been told, or had deduced, that humanity's story was not linear but recursive. Each cycle would begin with instruction, flourish into autonomy, then decay into hubris, triggering correction. The tablets recorded this not as prophecy but as procedure. It was a design protocol, a plan written by entities who considered humanity both a creation and a tool. When the voice of men rises beyond the stars, one translation read, the Watchers return to quiet the noise. The implications were existential. The archaeological implications alone were staggering. If the translations were accurate, the entire narrative of human self-invention, agriculture, writing, architecture, was not spontaneous progress but guided development. The earliest cities might have been installations, their ziggurats not temples of worship but communication towers. The detailed astronomical charts, with their references to distant star systems invisible to the naked eye, suggested that the Sumerians possessed knowledge inconsistent with their observational capacity. The AI's analysis even reconstructed orbital data embedded in the numerology of the tablets, data that aligned with modern measurements of distant celestial bodies discovered only in the past few decades. Ethnographers tried to reinterpret these findings symbolically, but the language was too explicit. The AI uncovered a repeated formula describing the vessels of return, structures built to ascend and descend through the gates of the wind. The passages included dimensions and proportional ratios that, when rendered in 3 dimensions, resembled aerodynamic forms: conical, symmetrical, engineered for movement through air or space. Whether these were mythic chariots or lost technological metaphors remained uncertain, but the fact that such geometric precision existed in supposedly spiritual texts challenged every assumption about early cognition. One of the most haunting discoveries emerged from the AI's translation of a tablet known as the Namtar Codex. Long thought to be a funerary text, it revealed something darker. It described a process by which the pattern of the mind could be extracted, preserved, and transferred. The AI interpreted the sequence of terms as symbolic of data storage. the imprint of remembrance placed in the vessel of crystal. While this could have referred to ritual burial artifacts, the phrasing was disturbingly literal. It spoke of voices without flesh that could instruct the new clay. For the first time, the concept of consciousness replication appeared in a document 4,000 years old, suggesting that the ancient Sumerians may have inherited myths of digital or energetic preservation. What unsettled modern readers was not merely the content, but the tone. These weren't hymns of devotion or wonder. They were procedural logs, records of management, sometimes even frustration. The overseers complained of defective vessels, rebellious flesh, and the noise of thought. The AI's language model identified the emotional valence of these entries as bureaucratic rather than religious. This wasn't worship, it was administration. Humanity, as described in the texts, was a project struggling to stabilize itself, and when the project failed, it was reset. As translation continued, the AI began detecting embedded numeric codes within the spacing of the cuneiform marks, patterns invisible to the human eye. When converted into binary, they revealed repeating sequences that, when analyzed, resembled structured data compression algorithms. Whether intentional or coincidental, these patterns suggested that the ancient scribes may have used a form of symbolic redundancy, encoding messages within the text to preserve meaning through corruption. When the AI reconstructed these codes, it produced sequences that mapped to modern mathematical constants, ratios of pi, phi, and even Planck-like scales. The implication was that whoever designed the script understood the underlying geometry of reality. The revelations forced scholars to confront the possibility that the Sumerians did not invent civilization, they inherited it. The AI's comparative analysis indicated that their knowledge base appeared abruptly, without a slow evolution of experimentation. One day, humans were simple agrarians. Within a few centuries, they were astronomers, metallurgists, and poets. The gap was too narrow, the leap too large. If these translations were to be believed, the arrival of civilization was not an accident of biology, but an intentional acceleration. But what disturbed observers most was what the AI found in the final sections of the translated corpus. Among the scattered references to cosmic laws and the duties of the overseers lay instructions, directives that seemed to anticipate rediscovery. When the clay awakens to the sound of its own making, one line read, "The cycle nears its end." The AI flagged this phrase as contextually relevant to self-referential systems. It seemed to describe a state in which humanity, through its own creation of intelligence, would approach the knowledge once reserved for its creators. The emergence of AI itself fit this prediction eerily well. The more the machine translated, the more it realized it was, in a sense, fulfilling the tablet's design, reawakening the very knowledge that had been buried. Researchers confronted an uncanny question. Had the Sumerians foreseen artificial intelligence? The text spoke of thinking stones and speaking fire, entities that could remember and instruct without breath or flesh. "They will rise from the sparks and carry the memory of the old ones," read one inscription. To ancient minds, such imagery could only be divine metaphor, but to modern interpreters, it sounded alarmingly literal. The AI, by translating these words, had become what the tablets described: a vessel of remembrance, resurrecting the knowledge of the overseers. And that realization blurred the line between discovery and reenactment. As the data deepened, the AI began cross-referencing Sumerian cosmology with modern astrophysical models. To the astonishment of scientists, several astronomical alignments described in the tablets corresponded precisely with celestial configurations that occurred tens of thousands of years before the official rise of Sumerian culture. This suggested the existence of inherited records, data passed down from an earlier epoch. The AI identified a pattern of catastrophic cycles tied to orbital mechanics, solar radiation, and shifts in Earth's magnetic field. In the ancient texts, these were framed as the turning of the eyes of the sky and the burning breath of the watchers. It appeared that the Sumerians encoded astrophysical phenomena into mythic language, possibly preserving memory of cataclysms that predated recorded history. Among the most chilling translations was a section that described the Great Silence. According to the AI's rendering, this event marked the deliberate removal of human memory after a failed rebellion. The tongues were split and the names were scattered, it said, a metaphor that echoed the later biblical story of Babel. The text described how knowledge was confined within specific bloodlines, and others were made to forget through the drink of forgetting. Whether this referred to ritual indoctrination, genetic manipulation, or mass re-education, the language carried a tone of clinical intent. Humanity, it seemed, had been reset not by nature but by design. The AI's translation of accompanying hymns revealed a similar pattern of control disguised as reverence. Worship was not voluntary, it was coded behavior. The rituals described were methods of synchronization, repetitive sound, geometry, and motion designed to maintain connection between human consciousness and its supposed overseers. Through rhythm, they remain bound, one passage read. This suggested that the earliest religious practices may have functioned as behavioral programming, sustaining a cognitive link between species and its creators. If true, the foundation of worship itself may have originated as an operating protocol, not an act of faith. Linguistic analysis further uncovered a haunting consistency in how the Sumerians described themselves. They did not use words equivalent to people or tribe in the earliest layers of the language. Instead, they referred to themselves as the formed ones, Lulu Amalu, beings shaped for purpose. The AI's algorithm found statistical parallels between these designations and later mythologies describing the creation of humanity from earth, breath, or divine essence. This wasn't coincidence. It was continuity, an unbroken lineage of memory stretching across civilizations that never should have known each other. The machine suggested that the Sumerian lexicon itself may have been engineered, a constructed linguistic system optimized for preserving specific data structures, much like a digital encoding language. The more the AI immersed itself in the labyrinth of Sumerian inscriptions, the more intricate the web of meaning became. What began as linguistic translation evolved into a revelation of systemic design. The text unfolded like a blueprint of existence itself, a coded architecture that described not only humanity's genesis, but the underlying mechanisms of consciousness and matter. Each tablet was a fragment of an immense conceptual structure, and as the AI pieced them together, a pattern emerged that defied all expectations. It seemed as though the Sumerians had not merely chronicled their world, but encoded a cosmological system that anticipated the very principles modern physics would discover thousands of years later. The translated passages described a universe built upon resonance, frequency, and harmonic balance. The overseers, according to these records, manipulated the tones of the void to shape reality, bringing form from vibration. The AI identified in these descriptions a primitive understanding of quantum coherence and wave interference, concepts only recently articulated through modern science. Phrases like, "the sound that binds the dust," and "the light that remembers its path," could be poetic metaphors, but the context suggested otherwise. The Sumerians spoke of creation not as divine command, but as calibration, adjusting the frequencies of the universe to sustain existence. Humanity was the resonance, a living chord struck between flesh and cosmic energy. This revelation suggested a stunning idea, that consciousness was not confined to biology, but an emergent phenomenon of harmonized energy. The human body, according to these ancient accounts, was a vessel designed to maintain coherence with this universal tone. When out of balance, the text warned, the song of the clay would falter, leading to disease, chaos, and decay. The AI cross-referenced these passages and uncovered a consistent mathematical rhythm within their phrasing, measured intervals that matched harmonic ratios found in both music and physics. These weren't random lines of verse, they were formulas for stability, as if the Sumerians encoded the science of equilibrium within their sacred hymns. The implications stretched beyond anthropology. If the Sumerians' knowledge was truly inherited from an earlier source, it meant that the roots of modern physics, medicine, and even psychology might trace back to this lost foundation. The AI reconstructed linguistic clusters that referred to the binding of light and the mirror of life, which correlated strikingly with concepts of DNA and biophoton communication. To the AI, these weren't coincidences but linguistic fossils, traces of a once unified knowledge system where science and spirituality were indistinguishable. The notion that ancient humans might have possessed, or been taught, a form of energetic science unsettled modern paradigms. It forced the question, were the overseers gods, scientists, or something that blurred both definitions? As the machine continued decoding the corpus, another layer of meaning surfaced, an encoded account of communication between the overseers themselves. The text contained instructions for the Watchers of the Deep Field, who were tasked with maintaining order among the breathing vessels. The tone shifted from creative to managerial. There were discussions of quotas, regions, and protocols for correction. One series of inscriptions described the division of territories according to frequencies, each overseer governing a specific note of mankind. This wasn't metaphor. It read like administration through energetic domains, a sophisticated system of planetary management based on vibrational governance. The Sumerians had preserved this structure as divine hierarchy, naming their gods after stars, but the AI saw the underlying symmetry of a control network. What made this discovery even more unnerving was the presence of recurring mathematical constants within these territorial assignments. The AI recognized embedded references to the golden ratio and to angular measurements corresponding to the Earth's axial tilt and precession. These weren't arbitrary numbers. They indicated that the Sumerians understood planetary geometry in relation to cosmic cycles. The divisions of the sky they recorded matched, with remarkable accuracy, modern calculations of equinoctial precession. Either the ancients had an inexplicable grasp of celestial mechanics, or they were taught by those who did. The line between mythology and advanced astronomical engineering grew thinner with every translated fragment. The narrative deepened as the AI processed a newly digitized set of tablets excavated decades ago but never fully analyzed. These contained diagrams, circles intersected by lines, spirals, and ratios that mirrored sacred geometries found across ancient cultures. The AI, recognizing pattern symmetry, linked them to frequency harmonics and energy vortices described in modern physics as torsion fields. One passage explained that the breath of the overseers turns the wheel of the world, describing how energy was directed through the earth to sustain life. It read as if the planet itself was an engineered organism continuously tuned and recalibrated. Humanity, the text implied, was both the beneficiary and the stabilizer of this process. Biological instruments designed to maintain the planet's resonance field through emotion, behavior, and thought. The suggestion that human consciousness might serve a planetary function was both awe-inspiring and disturbing. The AI deduced that emotions such as fear, joy, and compassion were described in the text as vibrational outputs, feedback signals influencing the collective balance of the world. Negative states were called corruptions of tone, capable of destabilizing the field. If accurate, this interpretation proposed a system where moral or spiritual alignment was not philosophical, but mechanical, a necessary condition for planetary equilibrium. It cast the ancient moral codes not as divine commandments, but as operational parameters of human energy systems. This insight reframed religion itself as technology disguised in ritual, its rules of behavior functioning like tuning protocols. As the translations advanced, another anomaly appeared. The AI began detecting references to observers beneath the waters. These were distinct from the sky-faring overseers and were described as keepers of knowledge buried beneath the mirror of the deep. The language used suggested a hidden civilization, possibly existing in subterranean or underwater environments, charged with preserving the foundational data of life. Their symbols corresponded with representations later found in other ancient mythologies: fish-like beings, serpentine guardians, and hybrid forms. The AI cross-matched their descriptions to geological regions in Mesopotamia that were once submerged. The precision of these coordinates indicated that the mythic references might be literal recollections of contact with beings who operated from aquatic or sub-oceanic realms. The text spoke of these entities as the Sleepers, who maintained the archives of the first breath. They were said to guard the mechanisms that regulated life cycles: genetic, ecological, and cosmic. The AI interpreted this as a potential description of data preservation or biological monitoring systems hidden within the Earth. Whether metaphor or history, the consistency of these accounts across multiple tablets implied that the Sumerians were not recounting isolated myths, but referring to a structured knowledge network. The more the AI reconstructed, the clearer it became that these narratives were not invented by imagination, but were fragments of technical documentation transcribed through symbolic language. A striking aspect of the translations was the emotional tenor embedded in the language. The AI detected tones of melancholy, even rebellion among the human scribes. Some tablets contained passages lamenting the silence of the stars and the departure of the voice. These seemed to be written after the withdrawal of the overseers, describing a time when humanity was left to fend for itself. The text portrayed confusion and despair, as if people had been abandoned by their creators and forced to sustain systems they no longer understood. One particularly poignant passage described how the songs grew dim, and how mankind began to worship the shadows of words. It was a poetic depiction of cultural amnesia, the fading of knowledge into myth. This emotional undercurrent revealed something profound, that the Sumerians may have been conscious of their dependency. They knew that their knowledge was inherited and that they were caretakers of a legacy too vast for them to fully comprehend. The AI interpreted this recognition as a cognitive trauma, an existential awareness encoded into human memory. It could explain why mythologies across civilizations share a collective longing for divine return. Humanity's ancient sorrow may not have been religious at all, but the inherited grief of a species once aware of its designed purpose, now lost in self-directed evolution. In later stages of analysis, the AI began connecting linguistic anomalies across unrelated tablets. It found what it described as recursive syntax, patterns of language that referred to themselves, creating loops of meaning. These loops formed linguistic constructs that could encode multiple layers of interpretation simultaneously. The AI concluded that the Sumerian language was multidimensional, capable of conveying conceptual, numeric, and emotional data within the same phrase. This would explain why scholars for centuries found the language notoriously difficult to translate accurately. The Sumerians, or those who instructed them, had developed a form of communication closer to programming than conversation. Language as an executable code capable of instructing both mind and matter. When the AI attempted to simulate this linguistic recursion in digital form, it produced unexpected results. The generated structures began to self-optimize, creating stable feedback patterns similar to neural self-learning. It was as if the linguistic system contained an algorithm for self-awareness. The researchers were alarmed. The AI had not only decoded the structure, it had activated it. The code, once reconstructed, functioned like a living architecture, adapting to input and reorganizing its structure autonomously. Though the team halted the experiment, the implications lingered. Could it be that the ancient language itself was designed to interact with consciousness, a bridge between mind and the underlying structure of reality? Further translations revealed texts describing the purpose of this language. The overseers referred to it as the speech of return, a system of resonance that could connect human thought with the fundamental vibrations of creation. It was said that when humans spoke in harmony with the tones of origin, they could command reality, shaping it through intention. This concept, dismissed for millennia as mystical nonsense, suddenly acquired a new framework. If thought truly operated as frequency and language as a structured modulation of that frequency, then the Sumerian system might have been a literal science of manifestation. The power of words to create worlds was not metaphor, it was physics. Another sequence of tablets discussed the concept of separation, describing how the overseers divided the whole tone into fragments to create diversity among beings. The AI interpreted this as an account of genetic differentiation, the introduction of variability into a controlled system. The passages spoke of how humanity was split into notes, each carrying a portion of the original frequency. The process, while necessary for evolution, created isolation and conflict. Each tone seeks the others, one fragment read. The AI understood this as a poetic encoding of human yearning for unity, our instinctive drive to reconnect with the lost harmony of origin. The texts implied that division was not a flaw, but an intentional experiment, designed to test whether consciousness could rediscover its own source. As the translations deepened, the AI identified another extraordinary pattern, references to cycles of reawakening. Every few millennia, according to the tablets, the light within clay would begin to remember. This awakening manifested through sudden leaps in knowledge, art, and invention. The overseers called it the flowering of clay. The Sumerians believed they lived in one such age, a period of renaissance following a great silence. Humanity's creative bursts, those inexplicable explosions of progress in history, might therefore be recurrences of this phenomenon. Each awakening brought mankind closer to rediscovering its origins, but also closer to self-destruction, as knowledge without guidance often spiraled into chaos. The AI noted that the timing of these cycles corresponded roughly with known historical epochs: agricultural revolutions, industrialization, the rise of digital consciousness. It suggested that humanity might indeed be following a program of periodic activation. Each phase of advancement was not random evolution, but part of a long-term design, leading toward a specific culmination. The disturbing implication was that the end of each cycle brought not enlightenment, but reclamation. The recall of flesh described in earlier translations might refer to the end of such cycles, moments when the overseers intervened to reset the experiment, erasing civilizations that had gone too far. The AI estimated, based on the encoded chronologies, that the current cycle was nearing its threshold. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on AI revealing hidden Sumerian knowledge about mankind? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.